we'll go ahead and get started tonight. If you guys have any questions along the way, just feel free to interrupt me. This is kind of going to be a more of a discussion than like in the past classes where I just kind of went through everything. But so we are. We're going to talk a little bit about plants, and then we're going to go into a little bit of troubleshooting, and then I've got several pictures I'm going to show you, and I'm going to kind of ask your opinion on them, what you kind of think might have happened to the bees or what's going on with them, just by looking at the frames. So to start out, we're going to go through some of the plants that usually start out blooming in the late winter and then go all the way through spring, summer, and then into fall. These are just the ones specific to this area. So if you're, anywhere else than southern West Virginia, then they probably vary somewhat. So this is henbit, and this is a common weed in your yard. This is one of the very first things that starts to bloom in the late winter. It's probably getting ready to bloom probably in February sometime, and it's just a little weed that grows along we've got a spot where we dig up every few years where our well is, where we have to change a pump or pull the pump out of the well. So we wind up digging it up, but this stuff always grows right there. It's kind of rocky, and it's just a space that it gets tilled up a lot. So this is kind of just a weed that grows along the corner of your house, around your foundation. And that's where it is at my house anyways. But the bees really like it, especially when these little purple flowers come out on it. And they get this almost bright crimson red pollen off of it. You'd think it would be purple, but it's more of a red looking color. And it's one of the very first sources of pollen in the late winter. So keep an eye. It doesn't really make any honey or any nectar, but it is a good source of pollen for them. Maple is another one that happens probably about February. So when there's warm days in February and the bees are out flying, they'll often go to these maple blooms. And it doesn't necessarily, you often look at the trees and you don't really see any leaves on them, but still there's somewhere either along a river or, in little small pockets where the air might be a little bit warmer, where the trees have budded out. And usually in February, they'll start bringing some of this in. And I think they get some of it even from the buds that grow on the trees. So, and it's almost like an olive color. You can go online and find all different kinds of pollen charts. Just punch in pollen chart in Google or Yahoo, and all kinds of images will pop up. We've looked at them in, I think it was the very first class or the second class, when we were talking about spraying some of the different colors. But it's a really colorful map, and it's got all the different colors of pollen on it. But this one is almost like an olive green looking color. So, and it really doesn't produce any kind of nectar. It's mainly just a pollen source for the bees. So. The first one that really comes out that is able to make honey from and they are able to get nectar from is the dandelion blooms. So usually the old time beekeepers say when the dandelion blooms, that's when you need to put your honey supers on. So I usually follow this rule. Whenever the dandelions start to bloom, that's usually when the apple comes out too. The apple blooms, and I'll put the fruit tree blooms. It doesn't necessarily have to be just apple, but usually all the fruit trees bloom around the same time, and I'll go ahead and put my honey supers on. This is usually late March, April, into April, and I'll go ahead and put them on there just in case we do get warm weather and the honey flow starts really early. So they usually don't keep any of this nectar for honey purposes, like that we put in our supers, that we stack on there. They usually use it for themselves and to build up their colony. So these are some apple blossoms. You can get a little bit of apple honey. It's not really that You don't really see it. It's not that common. If you have bees located, you know, in pollination contracts or whatever around some apple or groves, then you might get some apple honey, but it's not. I've never seen it before. I mean, it's out there, but I've never tasted it or had any. So, but they do use it as a good source of pollen and nectar, and you know, they help build up their brood from this. So. The black locust, this is another one. This one usually grows along the roadways and just scrub bushes, you know, scrub fence ways, little patches of woods that have been, you know, or pieces of field that have grown up and started growing trees in. So this is one that, like I said, it's just a kind of a scraggler bush, but sometimes they can get quite big. But they do, certain years they make a lot of nectar and produce a lot of honey. The honey's almost a clear, really light flavored honey, but it's really good, and it's a big source of nectar and pollen for the bees in southern West Virginia. So last year, this one usually blooms about the beginning of May, and we had a lot of trouble with cold snap at the beginning of May, and it wound up killing most of the bloom, so they didn't hardly get any black locust honey. And you know, that was pretty rough, because this is usually a pretty big source for us and them, you know. Autumn olive, this is definitely this is an invasive species shrub that has been brought over, and now it's basically, you know, if there's a roadway, this is usually what grows in it. It gets these little red berries after it's been there a while, and the blooms get pollinated. But it also produces a really light honey, really light flavor. We got some, I think it was the very first year, and it was almost like a clear, very, very pale yellow honey, totally see-through almost. But it's a really good honey. It's just, like I said, it's light in flavor. Usually the lighter flavors, honey, the lighter colored honeys are more like a lighter flavor. So they just taste mainly like sugar to me, with some honey background. Some of the darker honeys, you know, they have a little bit more flavor and more richness, and definitely have more taste to them, I guess you could say. But this one is a really big source for the bees, and usually when this is in bloom, it's usually real late. It's about the same time the black locust blooms, so late April, early May, and it probably goes through maybe the second week, the third week in May. And this is all weather dependent, so you know, it can vary as much as a couple weeks to a month in any year. This one, the year before last, when the autumn olive was in bloom, I was putting a super a week on my bees. So they bring in a lot of nectar from this one, and they make a lot of honey from it. So Tulip Poplar, this one's a little bit later in the year, so this one is probably in June, the early part of June, late part of May. And this one is kind of hard to see, you know, unless you're looking up in the tops of poplar trees. It's pretty easy to miss. Last year it bloomed very little, not much at all. I think the frost killed a lot of the buds, you know, and it just wasn't able to produce it very much at all. It makes a really dark flavor honey, really dark in color, and it's probably one of the better ones in my opinion. And you know, some years you get it and some years you don't. All of them are, like I said, weather dependent, and it's a good source of pollen also, as you can see from the flower there. There's plenty of pollen inside of it, and it makes a really great honey, and it's probably one of my favorites. This is alfalfa. It usually doesn't get cropped out around here. You know, if there's a field, a farmer usually cuts it before it goes to seed. We do keep alfalfa honey in the store most of the time, and this usually comes from big pollination contracts. I know a guy, he's in Florida, and he takes his bees to Ohio every year. It's one of the guys we get package is in nukes from, and he takes them to Ohio every year, and he pollinates these alfalfa fields. And up there, I guess they let them go to seed, and they take the seed, off the alfalfa somehow, and then they'll sell the seed. So they wind up getting quite a bit of honey when it goes to bloom. But a lot of the farmers around here, I think, I've never grown it, so I don't know a whole lot about it. But from what I gathered, they usually cut it before it winds up blooming, and so we miss out on a lot of the blooms. The bees do. Almost looks like there's a bee right there. I never noticed that. This is sourwood, and there's a lot of it down in North Carolina. There's some in Wyoming County, McDowell. There's some in Summers County, not Summers County. Yeah, there is some in Summers County, but Summersville. And I guess that's Nicholas County, but it makes probably one of the most expensive and sought after honeys that's made by the bees. It's really expensive. When I go to buy it, I pay sometimes upwards of $450 to $500 for a 5-gallon bucket of it. And it just makes a really bold, flavorful, it's almost like a butter flavored honey. But it's really good. I mean, it's great on, to use with just about anything. And it also makes a lot of nectar and produces a lot of honey for the bees. If it hits, last year, it was really one of the only things to, that one and the basswood, which we don't have a lot of basswood around here, but there is some around. But those two were some of the ones that made most of the honey. And it was odd because usually our honey flow is over with by the end of June. Well, last year, the honey flow didn't even really start until July. And we got most of our honey from July, maybe the last week in June, up until probably the second to third week in July. This is really odd because usually, we really don't get that. Especially because in Mercer County, there's not a whole lot of sourwood. There is some, like I said, but Wyoming has quite a bit, McDowell. But if you can put your bees definitely near some sourwood trees, by all means do it, because you'll make some really tasty and expensive honey that you can get rid of quick. So. This is clover, and it's just a grass that grows in your yard. A lot of people use it to plant their yards with, and it's all over the place. A lot of times it'll be in bloom, but it almost doesn't seem like the bees can get a whole lot from it. I know they do. I mean, there's a ton of clover honey out there, but maybe it's just the point or the fact that a lot of the clover here blooms in June, and by that time it's already started to dry out. We don't get as much rain, and it doesn't. Most of the time when the clover's blooming, I have to wind up feeding the bees, or my bees anyways, and it's really strange. You would think that because the bees were on the clover, getting nectar from it, that they would be getting honey and bring in enough to sustain themselves. But a lot of times this isn't the case, and you have to wind up, you're in the dirt and you still have to feed them. So, don't always take for granted when you see the white clover blooming in your yard, and assume that your bees are getting some food or have a food source. A lot of times that's not the case, and a lot of times you need to check on them and feed them. And that's usually in middle to end of June into July, the white clover will bloom. So this is Japanese knotweed, and it's another invasive species. There's a couple big patches around my house, and they're like right off the road in the ditch, and this stuff spreads like wildfire. It's really hard to kill, but you don't see a whole lot of it around here. It's kind of like kudzu, I think, down south. It kind of grows along the roadways, and it kind of just overtakes, certain pieces of land where it's able to get cultivated at. But you really got to keep an eye on it. It makes really awesome honey. It's a really dark honey, almost like a molasses flavor. We sell some here in the store. There must be a lot of it up north. One of the beekeepers I know up there that I get quite a bit of honey off of, he's got about 2,000 hives, and he's able to put several drums of it back every year. So he must get quite a bit, you know, and there must be quite a bit up there. But I'm sure, you know, he moves bees around all the time, so he's always moving to where the different crops and different plants are blooming at. This is goldenrod, and it's one of the smelliest plants you'll ever see. It smells like dirty socks when the bees start bringing it in. And it's just, most of these plants are just scrub bushes that grow along the roadways and in overgrown fields. You know, that's kind of where our bees have been pushed to. You know, all their food sources have been just kind of pushed. You know, when somebody mows their yard, you know, most of the time they're mowing over all these plants that could have a chance to grow and flourish. But most of the time people trim abandoned lots and stuff, you know, that they have, that there's nothing growing on, and they don't let them grow up, which, you know, I totally understand. But a lot of our bees have been pushed and had to resort to just like fence lines and little right-of-ways along the roads and just overgrown fields, you know, that people leave and just basically neglect. So those are really the main food sources where the bees are getting their food. But this one, it usually blooms around the beginning of September, and it'll bloom all the way through September and even in October a little bit. But it's a little yellow plant. People often mistake it with ragweed. It's not the same as ragweed. It just gets these yellow, little bright yellow. They're almost like a school bus yellow flowers on the top of them. But the bees, you can see the wasps, all different kind of insects love this plant. Maybe it's because it smells so bad. But I'll tell you a story about me and my wife, or I actually had she don't keep bees, she's allergic. So but anyways, I had them on the back porch, so that's a whole nother story. And they were right below our window. Our bedroom's on the second story, and there's a window right above where the hives were. Well, this was my first year keeping bees, and it was probably about the beginning to middle of September. And we were laying in bed, and we had the fan on, and it was blowing air from the outside, you know. And all of a sudden, I started smelling like dirty socks. And, you know, usually we're told in these classes that if you smell something that smells like dirty socks or smells like fish, you know, it's probably a American foul brood situation. Well, first thing I did was get on the internet, start searching American foul brood, what I need to do to get rid of it. You know, and I mean, American foul brood is really bad. Most of the time when you get it, you have to wind up just burning the hives. You can treat them with antibiotics, but you know, it's probably not worth the risk to transfer it to your other hives, and before long, you know, you got it in all of them. So anyways, I'm on the internet scurrying around trying to figure out, panicking, trying to figure out, you know, what I have to do to get rid of this American foul brood. And then all of a sudden, you know, at the time I was reading a lot of forum posts that were on the internet, and you get all kind of opinions on there, and half of them are wrong. So you really have to be careful. But anyway, somewhere along the line, it was mentioned, you know, that goldenrod smells like dirty socks. And I think at that point, it was kind of like, oh man, I think I might have escaped, you know, the American foul brood situation. But, you know, American foul brood is really rare. Usually there's only just a very few cases of it in West Virginia, if at all any. Most of the time it's kind of pushed to the really commercial beekeepers that have, you know, 1,000 to 2,000 hives. They get in it and they find it and they dispose of it, you know, to keep it from spreading. Because anytime you do get American foul brood, you know, you're supposed to let the state know, so that the state apiarist will come out and look at your hive. And most of the time, you know, whatever they tell you to do, whether it's treat it or dispose of it, you know, you kind of got to do it, because all it takes is those bees flying from your hive or some hive coming and robbing it out, then they're going to move it. But anyways, that's my story about goldenrod. Goldenrod does make a really flavorful honey, and it almost has that smell to it, but not quite as bad. But people they really still like it, and I myself don't care for it a whole lot. We sell it here in the store, but there's certain people that, that's what they want. They want the goldenrod honey, and that's what they're after. So this is a wing stem, and we don't have a whole lot of it in Mercer County, but there's a lot of it towards Tazewell, where you have a lot of the pasture fields, and it just kind of grows, in hay fields that might have grown up or done for the year. You'll find it there a lot of times, and it's along the stem. There's almost like another leaf that grows, so that's why they call it wing stem, and it produces almost like a clover flavored honey. It's kind of pretty light, mild, but it's a good source of nectar and pollen for the bees in the fall. So, all right. Does anybody have any questions about any of the plants that we went over, and just some of the food sources that the bees are able to use through the year?
Would you recommend planting anything, any certain type of weed or wildflower or anything like that, to give them a source like that?
Yeah, I mean, you can find all different kinds of, you can find buckwheat on there. Buckwheat's another one that I should have put it in here, but I forgot. It doesn't really grow like native here, but you can plant it. It's more like a cover crop, and it produces little white flowers, and it makes a lot of honey. It makes like a darker honey, almost like a molasses flavor. And it's really funny. We planted some in our garden one year, and the bees will work it until 11 o'clock, 11:30, and then after that, they're totally done with it. You won't see them on it the rest of the day. I guess the sap comes up and the nectar flows in the flowers, and then at lunchtime, when the sun comes out warm, it just goes right back down, and they don't even touch it. You won't see a bee on it. But up until 11:30 or so, I mean, it would be just covered with bees, and then all of a sudden they were just gone. So it was kind of cool. I was one of the guys that took the class last year. I think he was telling me he found some goldenrod seeds he was going to plant, but you can plant all kinds of different stuff, man. I think it's there's red clover and crimson clover. I think it's crimson clover that the bees will eat. Red clover they won't touch. That's a pretty good one to plant. A lot of this stuff just grows wild, but you can buy a honeybee mix that has all different kind of plants in it. I can't even begin to name some of them, but there's all kinds of different wildflower mixes out there for them. So, does anybody have anything else? So if you guys don't have anything else about the flowers, I'd kind of like to do a discussion if you guys have time, and if not, I can just talk about it. But I am going to go through and ask each slide what you guys think about it. And I know a lot of you have never been in a hive before, but you can maybe just give me your opinion on what you think is. Some of them are right, and some of them are right in a way that they're doing well, and some of them aren't doing really good at all. So you just kind of have to learn to look at the frames and read them. And then, once you get in there a time or two, you'll learn kind of what you're looking for and what seems normal and what seems abnormal, So to begin with, what do you guys think about the frame that we're looking at here on this slide?
I'd say it's a healthy frame that's having some starting to hatch out.
Yeah, so this is a really, the queen she won't usually lay in every single cell. Some of the larvae, they might be diseased and the bees might drag them out. Some of them might dry out and just die. So the ones that you see that are gone, you usually don't find a solid frame, totally solid 100%. But if I find the queen that lays this pattern, she's probably one of the best ones in the yard, you know, because it's an excellent frame. I can see a little bit of an issue here. If you can see in some of these cells, it almost looks like it's kind of glossy. I don't know how to use the pointer on this thing. I tried to do it one time and it totally messed it up. I'll try to see if I can get a pointer here. Maybe this. No. But anyways, you guys can't see my mouse though, can you?
Yeah, I can see it. It's kind of
Oh, you can? Okay.
upper middle left.
Yeah. So this cell right here that I'm circling with the mouse, this one, you can see that there's some honey in it. This one and this one down here. And man, what the heck? I don't know what that was all about. Didn't touch anything. But so these cells, you can see where they're starting to get nectar in them. And to me, that's a suspicion that the bees are becoming honey bound. And honey bound is when there's no room for the worker bees to store the nectar in. So whenever a larva hatches out, or a queen or a worker bee hatches out, that empty cell, they'll fill it with nectar instead of the queen coming back and laying an egg in it. And that's part of the problem, you know, you run into is you just run out of space. And sometimes you can add all the boxes you want, but the bees just don't want to move up, you know. It's really hard sometimes to get the bees to draw out frames when there's no honey flow going on. So if there's no nectar flow, then you'll have a hard time getting them to draw frames out unless you feed them really well, you know, feed them one-to-one syrup. So that's really the only thing I see. This one's kind of a little bit blurry, but it's a healthy looking frame other than just the few cells I see with some nectar or honey in it. And you know, that's a good sign that you better add some boxes really quick, or they're gonna try to swarm on you. So let's look at another one here. You guys have any other questions about this frame or slide?
Not necessarily that slide, but you're saying when it gets to that point, you're going to want to start adding some boxes.
Yeah.
How many brood boxes or honey supers, whatever, per hive? How many extra boxes do you want to try to have on hand?
Usually, I'll try to have at least 2. And the reason I keep 2 is if I put one on there and it gets filled up, I can add another one. Well, when I add that other one, if the one on the bottom's full, I can take it off and extract it and put it back on there. You know, I mean, you can extract it in one day. And then you don't have to necessarily let the bees clean it out. You can just put it back on the hive and let them just go right back to working on it. And that's the great thing about having drawn comb. You know, you can just keep using the frames over and over again, and the bees will fix them up and clean them, and they'll just start storing nectar right back in them. So usually I would say 2 brood boxes for the queen to lay in, and then you can put, if you want to use a queen excluder, put that on top of the 2 brood chambers, and then from there up, honey supers. So. And if you get new bees, you know, if you get a nuke or a package, it's probably going to take about a month for those bees to draw one box out, and then for you to add another box. So within a month, you should have that bottom box ready. You should be ready to add another super on, another brood box on. So that's a good rule of thumb, you know, when you're growing them. So if you get them in April, by the middle to end of May, you should have your second deep on, and then probably in June, you know, sometime you'll want to add a honey super. If things go well. If they don't go well, it could go bad in a hurry, you know. So what do you guys think about this frame here, this slide?
I remember you talking about the ones that look like this with the rainbow effect, but I don't even remember what it. Running out of room and starting to put honey in the brood
Yeah,
frames.
looks like they're putting a little bit of honey in where the brood normally is. But bees kind of go in this rainbow pattern. You know, that queen, she kind of, sometimes they'll lay frames like the other one, the one we just looked at. But in this one here, let me see if I can figure out how to draw this thing. So from there, can you guys see that line?
Yeah, it's real faint. I can see it, that blue line.
So from there in, you know, that's all brood. And if you've never been in it and never saw it, you know, sometimes it can be hard to tell what's brood, what's honey, what's pollen. So from here in, all this is brood, you know, that she's laid. This one here is a cell. They're either, sometimes you have to look, you know, at the individual cells, and you can kind of find ones that are maybe not so great. So this one here, the one, where'd my mouse go? There it is. Man. The one I circled there, the little cell, it's one that either they're getting ready to cap, or maybe there was an issue with it where they uncapped it. And, you know, you just want to keep an eye on stuff like that. So if you see them and they might have a pinhole in them, you know, you really want to keep an eye on them, and just make sure you don't have anything going on that you shouldn't have. I think this one's okay. It looks like they're starting to put some nectar in this one too. If I could get this tag on thing to work. Maybe Emily can tell me. It looks like they're starting to put some nectar where the brood's hatched out, but you know, other than that, it looks pretty good. So right there, below that arch that I drew, that's all brood. Let's see if I can get this thing. Where am I at here? It's not showing the mouse, man. Sorry. There it is. So that next band up, that almost maroon looking band outside of the brood, that is actually, it's what's called bee bread. And I don't remember if we talked about this a whole lot, but the bee bread is pollen that is mixed with honey and water, and it's fermented, and the bees use it to feed the young larvae. So they like that pretty close to where the larvae are in the brood, so that they're able to feed it to them. That bright kind of orange and yellow looking, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but right there on that third band from the inside, that one is just straight pollen, you know, that they've put in there. And it looks to be, when you look at a pollen frame, it's just all different colors. You know, a lot of it's might be from one certain type of plant, but then there's all different kind of colors mixed in, because, you know, at any certain time, there's not just one plant blooming. It's, you know, several that we don't even talk about, or we don't even think of, that they get stuff from, you know. I mean, there's hundreds that they can get pollen from. Not necessarily at one time, but through the year, you know, there's all different kinds. The ones I mentioned were just some of the ones that they use the most. But, you know, that's a band of pollen, and this is kind of how they like to do it. They like to put the brood in the center, then the bee bread, then the pollen, and then in the upper corner, you'll see honey that's been capped. And that's the way they like it structured. You know, like I said in the other classes, they typically like the brood in the center, then the pollen, and then the honey on the outside of that. So this is a really good looking frame. This is probably more typical of what you'll see as far as a laying pattern. And you'll find maybe one or two frames that are just totally filled with brood, and then you'll find more like this probably than any other. So you guys have any questions about this slide? All right. So here is a here's another slide and another frame, and this one is really good depiction of a hive that's honey bound. And it's just like the ones we talked before. You know, this one is a little bit more excessive. So all those cells that look like they're not like that brownish color, but they're more of a glossy, you can almost see the reflection in them. Those are ones that have nectar or honey in them. And you can tell this hive is really starting to get honey bound, and they really, they're probably already in the process of swarming because they know they're out of room. So if you get to this point, you know, you're probably almost too late. So you really got to keep an eye on them and try to catch them before they get this far along. Do you guys have any questions about this slide here?
How do you tell the difference in a frame like this and one where I can't remember which one it was, but where the queen is actually laying in a shotgun pattern like that? Is it just going to be the same but without nectar in the empty cells?
Yes, I mean usually, and you'll see one here in a minute that has more of a shotgun patterny look to it. This one is one, you know, where these bees are bringing in nectar so fast that they have no other place to store it. So every time a bee hatches out, you know, they automatically just clean it out and they'll stuff nectar in it as soon as they can. And that's kind of what's going on here is, you know, they're just running out of room. But you'll see one a little bit later on that has the shotgun pattern, and usually there's pinholes. So this one I don't see any pinholes in, but if you start seeing those pinholes, that's a telltale sign of European foul brood, which is the one that I had this past year. You know, and it's not so bad. It's something that's totally curable. It's a big pain in the rear end to try to get under control and kind of keep in check, you know. I can't remember the bacteria name, but it's basically a bacteria that is in all the hives. But when you have a certain period of the year that's extremely wet and bees are damp, and there might be some that die in the cells, you know, and the bacteria just starts to reproduce inside the hive, and then it gets, you know, it's basically a bacterial infection of the hive. And so a lot of the larvae, some of them will look sunken, some of them will have like pinholes in them. And really the thing to do is to treat them with antibiotics. You know, they say that you can you can cage the queen, put her in a push-in cage, which is basically just a screen that goes over the frame and kind of confines her to a small area, maybe about like that. And she stays in there, and it gives time for all that larva to hatch out, for the bees to clean the cells and clean some of the dead larvae out, and then, you know, then you can uncage her and let her go back to work. Another way they can say you can go about it is to just totally pinch that queen or kill her, and then add a new queen in, and then those fresh genetics along with the time that's given between the two queens, you know, you should be okay. But it's a situation that most beekeepers run into. Nobody wants to deal with it, and it's probably preventable for the most part, but it can definitely happen. So we'll talk about it here in a second too. So what do you guys think is going on in this this frame?
Probably going to get ready to swarm. I'm making a super seeder cell.
Yeah, so down here in the lower man, I cannot figure this out. Sorry. Thought I found it here. Oh, maybe there's one. Okay. I'm trying to get a pen here so I can mark on the slide so you guys can see, you know, some of this stuff that's going on. So right here, this is a swarm cup. It's not necessarily a real bad thing. What you want to do is when you see these is turn the frame up on its end, so you're kind of looking from the bottom up, and you want to look up inside this cell. And if you see an egg in here, you know, something that looks like a grain of sand standing on the end, then you know they're starting that swarming procedure to start to get ready to swarm. But if you look up and there's nothing in there, it's totally normal. They're usually always in a hive, no matter what. You know, if you see one, I'll usually scrape it out. But if I look in one and I do see a little bit of white royal jelly in the end, and then I see what looks like an egg in there, I will cut it out, and then I'll start looking through the hive to see the situation and what's going on. You know, this is really the earliest that you can catch a hive that's getting ready to swarm. So you want to keep an eye on it and try to figure out, you know, what's going on for sure and kind of what's happening. It can definitely lead to swarming if you don't do anything about it. So, you guys have any questions about that? This slide. Okay, we'll move on to the next one here. So what is going on in this one?
Looks like you got some cells that have already been capped over, maybe. They're in the middle.
Yeah, these right here, that one, really this whole bunch from there around. These are all drone cells. It's kind of hard to see when you're looking at the picture, but that's what they are. They almost look like bullet-shaped cells at the bottom of the on the bottom of the frames, because remember, all that wax foundation that's in those frames throughout the rest of the hive, unless you put a drone frame in there, those are all just worker bee cells, because the drone cells are larger than the worker cells. So the worker cells are smaller, and I think they're like right at 5.1, 5.3 millimeters, and the drone cells, they're, you know, quite a bit bigger than that. So usually what I do when I see these is I'll either scrape them off or I'll kind of uncap them and take the cap off and look inside and pull that larva out. And when I look at it, you know, you can see on the outside of it, if it has those little brown dots, those are the Varroa mites on the outside of the larva. And like I said before, the Varroa are attracted to the drone pheromone, because they know, you know, through their instincts, they know that the drones are capped longer than the worker bees, and the female can lay like 1 or 2 more eggs. So that's a big part of it. There's a couple other things that are going on here. This cell right here, I can tell this is developed more than just the queen cup. So I can tell just by the looks of it, because it's drawn down a little bit farther than the last one we looked at. Usually a queen cup will be, you know, drawn somewhere right here, but where this one's drawn down a little bit smaller and a little bit tighter, I can tell that there's probably royal jelly and an egg in here. So they're starting the swarm process. This one over here is one that looks like it's probably almost about ready to be capped. So, you know, once you get to this point, I don't know what these are now. I think these here are just empty cells. This is another swarm cup right here. But for the most part, you know, I think this hive is probably in the procedure of getting ready to go to swarming. So, and we'll look here in just a second. We'll look at some more that are a little bit more developed swarm cells. You guys have any questions about this slide? So here's one. It's a good one from the side, so you can kind of see the comparison. So, you know, when you look in a hive, all these swarm cups or swarm cells or queen cups, you know, whatever name you want to use, doesn't always have to be in the same stage. So this one over here is probably just a plain old swarm cup. And you look up in it, and it might not even have anything in it, but you know, if you see a little egg like that size up inside and royal jelly up in the very end of it, then you know it's the making of a swarm cell. And remember, swarm cells are usually on the lower third of the frame, and supersedure cells are on the upper third of the frame. So that's one way to tell, you know, whether there's a queen in there or not. The cell down here on the bottom, see how much more drawn down it is, you know, and how much longer it is. This one is probably within, this one is probably within a day or so of being capped all the way down. And once it's drawn down a little bit further, you know, and capped, by the time they cap the end of it, she's probably already swarmed, and you know, a half to a third of the bees are already left. So once you get to this point, you know, you really have to, if you're going to try to save them and keep them from swarming, you really, once you see this, you need to either dig through every frame and find the queen. If the queen is in there, you know, you can cut every cell out. Chances are they'll probably make them back again, or you can make a split from this hive that you have here. And those are probably really your only two options: either cut them all out, let them swarm, or make a nuke. So I guess there's three options.
When you make a split, do you take the frame that has the queen cell in it, or do you take the queen and put that in a new box and then let the other ones take care of the new queen?
I guess it really just depends on what you're trying to. You could do it either way. I would say if you're going to take one, if you try to let a nuke make a queen, sometimes the queens won't be great because there's not as many bees in there. They can't bring in as many resources. So if you let the big hive make the queen, you have more bees, more resources, more bees to make more royal jelly, more nectar, more pollen coming in, and you wind up with a better queen, so they say. You know, I've done it both ways. Can I really tell a difference? No, not really. Probably because more times than not, I'll let the bigger hive make the queen. Once you get to this point, though, and say this cell down here on the bottom is already capped, it doesn't really matter at that point. You just have to have a warm place to put it, and you know, bees to cover it, and then she'll hatch out, go get mated, come back and start laying. So at that point, you know, once it's capped, it probably really doesn't matter either way. But you know, you have to sometimes when you look in hives like this, I mean, there will be maybe 10 of these cells on each frame, you know, 3 or 4 frames worth. So what I'll usually do is go through and cut all of them but 3 out. And this is kind of why beekeepers have so many beehives, is because they get in there, you know, and there's frames and frames with swarm cells on them. And you just keep making, you know, if you have plenty of bees, you can make however many nukes up you want. That's my problem. I make too many nukes. And, you know, it just depends on how you want to go about it. You know, if you don't want very many, cut them out and throw them away. The bee, you can lay them out. The bees will clean them up and reuse the royal jelly. Or, you know, just take one frame out and pick 3 good cells and leave them alone. Make sure not to smash them or crush them, and put them in a nuke, and along with maybe 2 more frames of closed brood and a frame of honey, and you got yourself a new hive, you know. So I think on the next slide, yeah, so this slide here is showing some that have already been capped. So they're totally closed here on the bottom. They're not open at all. And at this point, you know, you can just transfer those over to a nuke and make a hive. But chances are, if you look in there and you got cap cells like this, the queen's already gone. So you probably don't want to move any frames around. At this point in the swarm cell procedures, this one's probably about 10 days in. So you're 10 days out of about 28. So you got about 18 more days before you get a laying queen. So you really, you know, that's why it's important to look in them every 7 days. If you get in them about every 7 days during swarm season when there's a big nectar flow, you'll be able to catch them in probably at least this stage. And at that point, you still have time to do something about it, you know, and catch her and the bees before they leave. So, you know, when it gets kind of tricky is when it's raining for a week, you know, and you can't get in them. Then, you know, what do? Do you just let them be and try to risk it, or do you go out there in the rain? But usually when you go in the rain, you know, it's a sting fest, man. You're probably going to get lit up. So do you guys have any questions about like supersedure or swarming or anything like that?
If you decide to make a nuke with the queen, and let's just say you've got one box, one brood box. When you transfer her to the nuke, how many frames of brood you want to take with her, and how many do you want to leave with the old swarm?
I'll usually take at least 3. If you take at least 3, then you're more likely to make a hive that's going to be built up enough for winter. If you just take 2, you know, a queen will only lay as many eggs as the bees in the hive can take care of. So if there's not very many worker bees inside the hive, you know, she's limited on how much she'll lay. And really it's that factor that is able to make a big, strong hive, you know, that's able to make honey. So 3 is kind of the magic number. Definitely the more the better, you know. I mean, you can split them equal in half and come out fine, but you're probably, chances of getting honey, you know, are probably going to be less. It really just depends, you know, what you want to do and how quick you want to bring them up. But usually I'll move at least 3 frames of brood over. I try to get frames that are capped already, because then the worker bees that are in the small nuke, you know, they don't have to work near as hard or have near as many resources and able to raise a good hive. So
if you find a hive in nature and you want to trap it, can you put a trap just out next to it and they'll naturally go find it?
Yeah, I mean, you can, and that's definitely a possibility. You can set out a swarm trap next to it and definitely get them. But, you know, sometimes it could be tough, you know, you might have to wait a few years. But, you know, it just depends on how you want to go about it. If you know there's bees somewhere, and your neighbor has some down the road, and they don't take care of them and they just let them swarm, then you can set a swarm trap out and catch them. I mean, they were probably going to let them go in a tree or a house somewhere anyway, so you might as well catch them. But there are definitely wild bees out there, but they're not in anywhere near numbers that they used to be, because most of the time the Varroa just can't keep track of it. The Varroa is what usually winds up doing them in. Anything else? So what do you guys think is going on in these 3 slides? Or what's going on? It looks like it's already happened to me. So if this was all in one hive, just different pictures from the same hive, you see this flap here on the end of that cell. This queen, when she gets ready to be, when she gets ready to come out of the cell, out of the queen cell, she'll chew her way around, through here, and she chews her way around in a circle, and she almost opens it like a tin can. So the flap will just kind of open up and swing out from the bottom. And that's kind of how, if you find one like this, she's probably just hatched out within that day or the past, couple hours. The first queen out will go around to all these other cells. So this here is a cell, this is more like a supersedure cell. Just pretend it's a swarm cell for now. But the same scenario can happen. So this queen here, this one inside this cell is not quite as developed, but the queen that's already hatched, so she'll chew a hole through the side, and she'll sting this larva that's inside that cell. And if you remember, queens, they don't have a barb on their stinger, and that's the their way of being able to control their genetics. So they'll go in, they'll cut a hole in that cell that's developed, that's that queen cell, and then they'll sting and kill that queen so that they can further their genetics. This one up here, same scenario. It's been chewed through the side of it, and then she went in there, stung that developing queen, and then the worker bees have just uncapped it, because they knew that it was dead, and they took it out. This one here looks like another beginning of a swarm cell. This one is one that came down and kind of came back up like that, but you can see where the other queen, the one that had hatched out first, had chewed a hole in it, and then she stung the queen inside there. So let's see what else. I don't see a whole lot else going on here. So this is a natural, you can see where this hole is here. This is a natural wax frame that is really delicate. And a lot of times where you have these cutouts, they'll put queen cells and swarm cells along those areas. Just in case you're wondering, this one here's that might be a smash drone, actually. It looks like only half, but see, the eyes are bigger than the regular worker bees. This is another drone here. See how round their butt is? That's another drone. This is a worker. That's a worker. All these are workers. I don't see any queens or anything, but that's kind of what would be going on if you looked inside this hive and you saw all these kind of this evidence, of what's going on. So So here's a good one. Can you guys tell me what's going on in this one?
Is that drone cells there on the left?
Yeah, this one here is a drone. This one's a drone. That's a drone. See that big? They call these like purple eye drones. That's a drone. You can tell from their eyes just how big they are, you know. This is another drone. See, their butts are a little bit more fatter and more round and not as pointy as this one. But what's going on in this one is, so that this picture tells a story. What the heck? These frames are telling a story of what's happened. So right here is a queen cell or a swarm cell that's happened. And it looks like maybe she hatched out. Maybe it might have been one that got chewed out. But for whatever reason, she went on her mating flight and she didn't come back. A bird might have eaten her. A Mack truck might have hit her. You know, who knows what. But you can see in here how kind of scattered the brood pattern is up here on the top frame. And you can see it down here too. I mean, the pattern is just not very good. And these cells are sticking out, you know, like a bullet shape. So when they start sticking out from where the other frames, you know, when you look at the other frames and there's worker brood on there, they're all in one plane, they're all flat. This, if you turn it up and look down it, it's all bumpy and wavy, and it just looks like they look like bullets sticking out, you know, the head of a ammo cartridge. And so these bullet shapes, they're all drone cells. So what has happened is there's been no queen in this hive for probably about 3 weeks. When there's no queen in there, and the bees are totally hopeless, so they have no open brood, they have no larvae, no eggs, they're hopeless. They can't make a queen. So one of these workers, and it's usually a young worker that just hatched out, her ovaries will develop from the lack of queen pheromone. And when that happens, she starts laying eggs. But she's never been mated by the drone, so they're all unfertilized eggs. And an unfertilized egg is basically a drone. So we call those laying workers. So she goes, and if you start seeing an egg pattern that looks like this one down here, this is a laying worker egg pattern. They lay, you know, this one has 6 eggs. That's an egg, 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 that's an egg. So 6 eggs inside this cell, and they're all clumped up. See how she lays them like kind of on the side? And then some of these, there's actually larvae. There's 2 larvae there growing. So these are, that worker abdomen is not long enough to reach all the way down in the bottom of the cell. So that's the reason that the queen has a rear end that's longer than the worker bee. You know, her butt goes in and she lays an egg in the very bottom in the center of the cell so that the larva can grow correctly. The laying worker lays it on the side. She kind of just drops them in the bottom. You know, she kind of thinks she's a queen where she's really not. She's just kind of really just screwing everything up, you know. So the only way to really do anything about it is to get rid of all that worker brood, the worker bees. So what I normally do, there's 2 ways you can go about it. You can take your whole hive, take it about 100 to 150 yards away, and shake every bee off every frame. Just dump them in the grass. And then take the frames in the hive back and set them up in the location where it was at. And all those field bees that are out working the flowers and bringing in nectar to support this laying worker queen or laying worker bee will fly back to the hive. And that laying worker, since she's a young nurse bee, she's never been outside the hive, so she doesn't know her way back to where they were at, the position of the hive, like the worker bees that go out and or the field bees. So she'll be dead in the grass and she won't be able to find her way back. But the field bees will make it back. And then, you know, if you have another hive, you can add frames of eggs and larvae to it. And that larva, that open brood, open larva pheromone will, I guess, trigger these bees in order to make a new queen. But it's kind of it's a thing that, you know, every beekeeper runs into. It's something that nobody wants to have to deal with because it's a real pain in the butt. You know, it messes up your frames, and when the drones are laid in there, the cells are bigger, so it messes up the configuration of the cells, you know, and it just kind of messes the frames up. I mean, they're usable, but the next time that queen lays an egg in there, it'll develop. You know, she'll lay a drone egg in it, an unfertilized egg. I don't know how nobody really knows how she tells the difference, but she can tell the difference between her body producing a fertilized egg, which is a worker, versus an unfertilized egg as a drone. So it's kind of a tricky situation. But you guys have any questions about laying worker? Another thing that you can do is one I didn't mention is, so if you have a laying worker like this and you don't want to dump all the worker bees out of it, you can add a frame of eggs from another hive once a week for 3 to 4 weeks. And that pheromone from the eggs and the open brood will go through the hive, and then it will start to suppress those ovaries of that laying worker. And then probably what will happen is the other bees will recognize the laying worker and they'll kill her. So then at that point, you know, once you don't see any more of the eggs, of these big clumps of, you know, 5 and 6 eggs and eggs laid on the side of the cell, then you're free to add a queen, you know, or just let them make a queen from the eggs you've added. I will say something that you might run into a little bit later on, maybe a year or two down the road, once you start adding queens to hives, new queens. Well, I guess you could run into it, you know, this year if you have a queen that is one that's swarmed and then you get a new laying queen. Sometimes when queens first start to lay, they'll kind of lay this spotty pattern, you know, with 2 or 3 eggs. It's usually not 6 or 8. It's usually more like 2, 3 in the bottom of the cell. And sometimes people will mix up, you know, a laying worker with a new queen. But you just got to give them time. If you know there's a queen in there and you know she's doing her job and she's new, then it's probably just a matter of her just starting laying, and she lays like 2 or 3. She can't. What it is she can't control the release of the eggs, so more come out, than she anticipated. So, you guys have anything about the laying workers? Let me clear this slide off here. Okay, what is going on here that you see that might be an alarm?
The wings on that bee.
Yeah, so this one has the curly wing virus. You can tell by the wings how they just look kind of shriveled. This one's just not even there anymore. That's the only one I really see. I don't see any more, but this is a really good indication that there is a really high population of Varroa in the hive. Once you start seeing the curly wing virus, it's just one of the characteristics that shows in the bees, one of the physical characteristics that you're able to see to know that there is a high Varroa population. And at this point, you're on the threshold of probably not being able to bring them back. That's what I was always told. I've had hives that had the curly wing virus. I treated them right away and they were okay. But if you let this one go into winter and, if this is any later than probably, I would say, the middle of August, then to the end of August, you're probably too late. So you really, unless it's just one or two, you know, but if you look in there and you see 10 or 12, you got a real problem, you know. I guess it doesn't show up a whole lot, but this is just, you got to think, this is just one of about 20. I think there's like 22 or 25 viruses that the Varroa can transmit to the honeybee. So this is just one way to tell, but, you know, chances are this is probably a pretty sick hive that needs taken care of really quick. So what do you think is going on here?
Is this the shotgun pattern of laying that's common with foul brood?
Yeah. So there's really two things that can cause a brood pattern to look like this. There is the European foul brood, which we talked about, and you know, these things probably go hand in hand, the European foul brood, and then there's a virus, it's called Parasitic Mic Syndrome. And this is where, you know, they lay a real shotgun pattern brood. You'll start to see diseased bees, diseased larvae. But I would say this is probably European foul brood. You know, it's shotgun. It looks like it was shot with a shotgun, the brood pattern. So here's a cell that's got a pinhole in it. Here's one that's partially uncapped. Here's one uncapped. Here's one that's uncapped. Here's one. You know, there's several instances of it. And then can you see how the bees are like almost like this one? Here's a really good example. The larva is almost like, what the heck? The larva is almost like sunken in the bottom of it. It's almost like a melted, you know, it's just like melted into the bottom of the cell. And there's several, you know, that are just uncapped. They're kind of brown looking. It's just not a healthy hive whatsoever. And this one, you know, you really have to treat it right away. So what you treat it with is terramycin, and it comes in a powdered form. The terramycin, it's called TerraPro. I think you can get it. You actually have to have a vet write it up now. So if you don't know a vet, you got to have a vet visit, and the vet will come out and they'll look at it and they'll say, you know, yeah, they probably don't even know what they're looking at. Honestly, you can probably just call one because most of them think it's a pretty big joke. And a lot of beekeepers, you know, they don't care for it, nor the vets, but I guess it's a problem where people were just treating with antibiotics no matter what, and they weren't seeing any European foul brood. They were just automatically dumping antibiotics. Antibiotics were getting into the honey, you know, and just not good. You shouldn't do it every year. But once you start seeing this, you can sprinkle, and there's specific directions. I can't remember. I think it's once a week for 2 weeks. And you just sprinkle it. You don't want to sprinkle it right directly on the brood, but on the outer frames, you know, on the tops. And then basically the bees eat it. They get it in their guts. It kills the bacteria, and they spread it around to the cells that have the infected larvae and bacteria, and then, you know, it clears it up. So, but all these uncapped cells, you know, are larvae that have been infected with that bacteria. How you'll know the difference, you know, between American foul brood and European foul brood is you get like a toothpick or a piece of hay or straw or something, and you put it down in one of these brown, if I was going to do one, I'd probably do like this one here, and this one, the one that I looked at, and some of these yucky like yellow brown ones. But for one thing, it'll smell really bad. They say it smells like fish, like rotten fish. And, you know, that's where the foul comes in, the European foul brood, which when I had it, I couldn't smell it. But the American foul brood, they say really, really stinks, and you can smell it before you even get in the hive. You put the toothpick down in the cell and you twist it. And when you pull it out, if it's really ropey, you know, and it comes out about that long, and it's just like a string, like slime almost, then you probably have American foul brood, which, like I said before, it's probably not that common. You're probably never going to run into it, but you never know. You're probably going to run into European foul brood a lot more frequent than definitely American foul brood. So, but it's just something to keep an eye on. You know, if you start running into this, you probably want to get your mentor or somebody to take a look at it. And kind of see. You can call a state apiarist. You just tell them you got an issue where you might think you have European foul brood. She can come down and look at it. As far as the parasitic Mic Syndrome, she'd probably even come look at that too. It's Shanda King is the state apiarist, you know, the one in charge of everything. But there's several people that help her, and they'll come out and take a look. They're really good about it. Helping you look around in your hive. And if you register, I think last year, they used to not do this, but whenever you register your hives, they'll automatically call you and schedule a time to come out and look at them, look through your hives with you, and kind of educate you maybe on what they see. And, you know, they'll help you out, register them for you. So it's a good thing. But if you do have parasitic mite syndrome, you know, the one thing you can do is definitely treat. You probably want to treat with something pretty strong. At this point, it's looking pretty dismal, you know. But formic acid, if you were to put formic acid in this hive, I would imagine it would probably wind up killing the hive, because for one, I don't see many bees on there at all. And two, you know, if the bees that are diseased usually wind up at the entrance dead. Formic acid is a really harsh treatment. Something like Apivar would probably do pretty good. It's a 42-day treatment. It's a man-made chemical. It's not organic, but it does a really good job. So, you guys have anything about parasitic mite syndrome or European foul brood or anything? All right, here's one. I don't know if we even talked about this, but if you guys feel like you want to make a guess, you're more than welcome to. So, you know, usually you'll find this in every hive because Varroa are in all hives, pretty much no matter what. But this here is Varroa Feces. So after the bee hatches out after the bee hatches out, that Varroa feces will be left in the bottom of the cell, and it usually collects, you know, it just looks like little white crystals. But that's what it is, and it's probably a little bit larger sign that, you know, if you're seeing that much in that little area, you know, you probably got an issue. I think that's just the glistening, but if you're seeing that much in that little of an area, then you probably got something you really need to check into and start treating your bees. You know, make sure that what you got going on is working, because something's up. So you probably need to go ahead and treat. So these slides are a lot clearer in person. They're a little bit fuzzy. What do you guys think is going on here? This is one you might not see until the winter time.
Are they, if it's something in the wintertime, are they huddling together to keep the queen warm?
Well, they were, but they're dead. It's kind of hard to tell from the picture because it's so fuzzy. But so this right here is actually mold on them. You can see that white stuff. Like I said, these pictures are not the best. I can send you the PowerPoint so you can look at them a little bit better. But this is all mold on the bees. So what's happened is, you know, this hive's probably went into winter, you know, with limited amount of bees. So the winter bee population is probably pretty dim, pretty low. And and there's just not enough numbers to keep the queen warm and for them to be able to move to be able to make it to where there is honey at. So what's happened is they've all clustered together. It's gotten cold, and then they've probably it looks like they've gotten wet, and then they froze to death. So this is a little bit on, this is a little bit on later on down the line, once you get into your first winter, but it's definitely something to be aware of. This is probably maybe a softball sized bees, probably not even that much, probably about a baseball. So, there's probably some that have fallen off. So it was probably, when they were clustered alive, it was maybe about the size of a softball, which for most bees is probably not enough to be able to make it through winter and be able to move collectively around the hive to be able to get to honey. So it looks like they've had a moisture issue and they've wound up freezing to death, along with the population just wasn't quite high enough in the hive. Does anybody know what this is?
Are those mites? The little black brown specks?
Yeah, these little brown specks here. These are Varroa. All this other stuff is wax cappings. It looks like maybe this hive might have gotten robbed out. Usually when a hive gets robbed out, the bees will uncap the wax really quickly, and they'll just kind of like rip it out, and all the wax cappings will just fall to the bottom. But there's been a serious mite issue in this hive, and a lot of times the mites, you'll see them on the bottom board. This is a sticky board somebody sprayed with Pam or put some kind of grease on so that the mites stick to it when they fall and they don't climb back up onto the bees. But I lost my train of thought. So what happens is, normally you don't see the mites on the bees because they're underneath they're on their bellies underneath those plates. So they go in between them, and you just don't know that they're there. Every once in a while you might see one on the back of a drone that's maybe moving to the underside, but for the most part, they're really hard to see unless you do a mite test. But yeah, this one here is in bad shape. It's probably done for. So what about this? Is actually looks like it's upside down. But what do you think's maybe going on here?
I'd like to hope it's just a bunch of bees cleaning out cells all at one time.
Yeah, me too. Not the case though. These they've starved to death. So when bees, and this can happen during the summertime too. A couple years, I guess it was probably 2 years ago, I looked in a few of mine. Even last year, I looked in a few where we had such screwed up weather, and all the blooms were killed, by the frost. I went into them, and when you take the lid off a hive, the bees should scurry about most of the time. Some of them will fly out if you take it off real quick, but if you open it, they should be moving and look like a normal hive. These, you get into them and the bees are just barely moving. It's like they're almost barely alive, in which they probably are. They were starving to death. So this was a small nuke. I was feeding out in the field, just open feeding. So I had a big 5-gallon bucket I flipped up on the end, and I drill holes around the rim. Well, the sugar water leaks out into those little, it's a rim that runs around the outside of the barrel well, it's towards the top, but you flip it upside down. And it fills up with sugar water. Well, they just use it to drink the sugar water out of. And I had it out, but I guess this hive didn't find it. So ultimately they were pretty much starved to death. I was able to bring them back, but And I just checked them the week before, so it can happen really fast. But this one looks like it was maybe in winter, and they basically just run out of food. So I guess maybe this is, when they know they're gonna die, maybe they just huddle up and kind of go head first. But this is what it looks like, when they starve to death. So.
Now, if you say you were to have that issue and you catch them and feed them, get the hive back, do you got to clean those cells out, or once the bees make a comeback, are the worker bees going to take care of cleaning out
They'll
the dead
clean
bee?
them out. Yeah, they'll clean them out. I mean, they're really, you don't really have to clean anything out. The only thing that you can't reuse is ones that are probably, we don't have a lot of small hive beetles up here. We have some, but they don't slime it real bad. But if you have a honey frame where the hive beetles have slimed it, I mean, you'll know, man, because it looks like Ghostbusters are went in there and just like completely just nasty. You'll want to throw it away. Or one that's had wax moss on it and it just looks, they're nasty too. So you really just have to, those pretty much you just have to throw them away. If they're plastic foundation, you can scrape the wax and the junk off of it, but you'll have to recoat it in wax because those wax moss have chewed it all up. But yeah, like a frame like this, just put it back in, and the bees they'll go in and they'll clean it out, and they'll take all the dead carcasses out and dump them out front and go at it again. And this is the same thing. This happens, in nature. If you have a cavity with the hive in it and the hive dies, well, the next year the bees can smell that aroma of that hive. They'll come to it, they'll clean it out, and then they'll make it their home. Same thing with a house. They'll do the same thing. The bees will die one year, the next year they'll be back. So you're not pushing them to do anything that they wouldn't normally do. So this one here is just another one that they've probably died from the cold, but you can see where the cluster was in the center here, where they've just moved around the center of the frame and ate the honey. But there probably just wasn't enough bees in there to sustain the hive over winter and able for them to move collectively around the hive. And so what happens is when it's really cold and there's a limited amount of bees, they can't move to where the honey is. So even if the honey's, half an inch to an inch away, they still can't move there because they're not able to move as one unit. They can't move as one bee there, that they freeze to death. But they have to use each other's body heat to stay warm. So they're not able to move to the honey because there's ultimately not enough bees in there. But, there's still plenty of honey. You can see the honey all around the edge and the outside, but they probably still, this one's probably froze to death, but ones where you can see them in the center and sometimes there's honey just around the top. That's what's happening. This is something here you'll run into a lot. This is the inner cover, and it's in the middle of winter, you can see, but it's got mold on the inner cover. And, they put this little slot up here, that one right there. Ours don't even come with one. You got to cut it yourself, but, you can cut it. What I recommend to people is to take 4 screws and put one in each corner. We'll give you the screws. I got like 10,000 of them. You just put a screw in each corner, or you can use a nail or just whatever, just to hold that outer cover up off the top of the inner cover, and just let because all the warm air, what this thing does doing that, all the warm air comes from that center hole. So as the air comes up and hits that outer cover, it's basically like setting a cold Coke can on your warm counter, you know, the water just condenses on the outside of it, and then eventually, you know, in a beehive, it'll lead to mold, you know, once that water sits up on that inner cover for so long. And then, you know, once the humidity gets up so high, it'll start actually sticking to the bottom of the inner cover. You know, this is the top here. It'll stick to the underside, and then it'll rain down on the bees, and it'll kill them, you know. So the best thing in winter to do is to get what's called a quilt box, and put your inner cover on the quilt box with the screws, and you should, at that point, you should be safe and good to go. So I think this is the last slide. Do you guys have any questions or need help with anything that maybe you might just want to know?
I know you mentioned it's best to get 2 hives starting out if you can. That way, you know, you can kind of see the difference if one's doing better or not.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm sure it'd be best to get 2 hives of the same type of bee. But would it be wrong or anything if you got 2 different types of bees?
No, no, I don't think you'd run into any issue. You know, sometimes, you know, bees will rob one another, but it's more or less a case of if one of the hives is already, you know, just so far gone that they can't really defend themselves, and they're probably going to die anyways, that other hive will come over and rob them out, you know, and it's just their will to live, you know. I mean, that's just what they do. They're animals, man. That's just part of nature, you know. So, but I think, you know, as long as, you know, you maybe put the introducer on and just keep an eye on them, they should be fine. I wouldn't think anything would come up. There's a lot of people that buy a buck fast and a Carniolan or, you know, a Russian or whatever they want. And I've got yards, you know, that, I mean, it's all mixed up. It's never the same in any yard. So. Well, you know, if you guys ever have any questions about keeping bees or anything like that, feel free to ask. I like to talk about it. My wife knows. You know, I mean, it's just something, you know, when you take on as a hobby, it's kind of almost like you really have to love it, and you really you want to think about it. You know, I mean, that's how I relax, really, is just thinking about it and learning new things and what to do and what I look forward to in the spring and in the summer and what I did wrong. You know, I mean, there's things along the way that 100% for a fact you're going to do wrong. It's just, you don't know, you know, until you do it. You don't know until you try. So, but you guys are more than welcome to message me on Facebook. If you want my cell phone number, you can text me. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me. Just text me and tell me what's up, and you know, maybe I can help you and steer you in the right direction. I certainly by no means know everything, you know, but I've had them and I've made a lot of mistakes, so I know a lot about that. But if there's any way I can help you guys, just please let me know. And if you guys have any more questions, feel free to ask.
Isn't there like a Honeybee Association or something around here? They meet, you part of that or anything?
Yeah, there's the Mercer County Beekeepers Club, and it usually met once a month, through most months. I think they took maybe June and July off because of people extracting honey, and you know, there wasn't a whole lot going on then. And then they might have took like December and January off, but for the most part, they usually meet once a month, and it's a great thing to get into. I go to some of them, not a whole lot. Beckley has a really good one. Raleigh County Beekeepers Association. Mark Lilly's one of the presidents up there. He's a part of the Appalachian Bee Collective, which is a really good organization. They run it's a non-profit organization where they'll give you the hives, the bees, and they'll put them in your backyard. You got to take a class, and then you got to give them so much honey, and it's a kind of a trade-off type deal, but it's a really cool thing to get into. But
Okay.
But yeah, the Mercer County or the Raleigh County, and I think they're operating by Zoom now because, with the virus and everything, they don't want to meet in person. But normally they meet down here at the Veterans Center, the Vietnam Veterans Center here on Mercer Street. Yeah, that's Mercer Street still. So
I talked to a guy up last meet. It was Godfrey subject, LP Godfrey. You familiar with him?
Yeah.
And he's real fond of the wired frames, the solid wax frames. Do you stock those up there?
Yeah. Yeah, they're the bees love them, but man, they're hard to keep. I mean, they just break easy, and there's a trade-off between either one, but yeah, we stock them. That's what I was doing today, was putting some together.
Okay.
They take forever to put. I can put probably about 15 of them together in an hour, but
All right.
Well, thank you guys for being a part of the class. And like I said, if you guys need any help with anything, or you want to stop in here at the store and just talk or whatever, I'm here. And we've got bees. We've got all kinds of different equipment and stuff. So we've got catalogs here at the store too, if you wanted to stop by and take a look at those. But by far, if you need anything, please let me know. And thank you. And if you got any questions, just feel free to ask.